start by giving you a bit of an overview of just how we've done financially during the year. So started the year with our goals. Our revenue budget was $23.539 million with a goal of providing net available to research of a minimum of $8 million. How did we do? We actually beat budget. We raised $24.1 million, so a little over $511,000 over target. Generated $8.7 million net available to research and research contribution, which was 8% ahead of the target. So a fantastic year. Thank you, everybody, for everything you did this year. It's really important work. That's not including CCTN, of course. When you wrap in CCTN, that has a bit of a multiplier effect on our numbers. So the consolidated statement for the year, we raised $30.4 million, which was 29% ahead of our goal for the year, ahead of target for the year. We provided in excess of $20 million to research, which is 150% over that $8 million target. Research-related education and advocacy, which is our bottom line, if you like, as you read it in our financial statements, we generated funded $24.4 million, which is really on par with last year and is at record levels for JDRF Canada. So fantastic again. Thanks, everybody. So type 1 diabetes in Canada. We've got a population of 33.7 million people. There's some 3 million Canadians living with some form of diabetes, be it type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes. About 10% of those, or 300,000 people, have type 1 diabetes. And unfortunately, in this room, we're all too familiar with that group of individuals. The number of people with type 1 diabetes continues to rise and rise exponentially. In fact, we're seeing the incidence of diabetes getting diagnosed both earlier and later in life right now. Every year, more and more, I'm hearing of children under the age of 1 being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And increasingly, I'm hearing a lot more 30-somethings, 35-year-olds who are having what would traditionally been considered a late diagnosis in life, being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So there is a disturbing trend going on out there in terms of the incidence of type 1 diabetes. And our goal here, obviously, is to try and address that and ultimately find a cure for it. And again, Canada currently has the 6th highest prevalence rate of type 1 diabetes in the world. So there is a higher prevalence by population of type 1 diabetes in northern climates. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, Russia, United States, Canada, there is a higher preponderance in the northern climates of type 1 diabetes. And that is not well explained yet. There's some theories out there as relate to vitamin D, sunshine, everything else. When you search the literature, none of those are well proven or well founded yet, but we do know there's a higher incidence in northern climes. So going back, and I've shown you this slide the last couple of years, or some of this information the last couple of years, it's about charitable donations in Canada. And it just gives us a good market overview of the space, the market segment we're dealing in, how people are contributing their donor dollars. So in 2011, there was $8.5 billion contributed. And sorry, I have to use 2011 numbers because Statistics Canada is always a year behind, so 2012 numbers won't be out until this time next year. But for trending comparison, it's useful anyway. So in 2011, we saw about a 2.4% increase, $8.5 billion of charitable contributions in Canada in 2011. Tax filers, so those are the people that actually claim charitable donations on their tax returns, stayed pretty much steady with the prior year. Percentage has gone down a little bit. That's probably because a few more people filed tax returns this year. That's a good thing, because more people are employed, or they're just getting more honest and actually filing their tax returns. And the number of donors remained roughly the same. But it's notable in all those years there, in 2010, 11, and 12, JDRF Canada actually beat our budgets. So I call this the generosity index. And I'm sure each of you are looking at your own province up there and saying, okay, how generous are people within my province? I'm pretty sure there's no representation in the room from Nunavut, but in Nunavut are the most generous Canadians, at least as they report it on their tax returns. If you look at the median contribution, and this is all charitable donations claimed on people's tax returns, so if you gave $20 to somebody other than JDRF, I'm not sure why you would, but in case you did, that would be incorporated in this number. But if you look at the median number, it's $260 of those that made or claimed charitable donations on their tax returns. That was the contribution. I want you to remember that $260 number as we go through and look at things like the average pledge level on our walk, our ride, and how we're doing relative to our donor base in terms of collecting pledges per individual. So a little bit about JDRF Canada. Some of you are old hat at this. Some of you are relatively new in the room and don't necessarily know what we look like as JDRF across the country. But we're functionally divided into 10 regions with 14 chapters and 11 staff sites. So we are truly a national enterprise in Canada. We've got a presence in nearly every community across the country, and that gives us a lot of reach. That's important for a host of reasons. One, type 1 diabetes occurs in every corner of Canada. I mean, it's not unique or doesn't have a greater density in major urban centers necessarily as you compare it to population. Two, it lets us run national events. And that's been very, very important for us as we've developed our corporate partnerships over the years. So unlike some other charitable enterprises in Canada that are very regionally focused, we have the ability to touch really all corners of Canada when we're running fundraising events, outreach events, talking to researchers, all those sorts of good things. And that's just the Canadian picture. I mean, JDRF, you have to remember, is truly a global organization. We're one of 7 international affiliates that are part of the mix that is JDRF. We raise money in those 7 countries around the world. We actually currently fund research as of last year in 18 different countries around the world. And that's a premise that has kept certainly me involved and interested in JDRF over the years. In that, type 1 diabetes doesn't know any territorial boundaries, nor should our research. If the next great idea is going to come from some country that may be out of favor, that doesn't matter to JDRF. We are there to fund the best research that exists anywhere in the world. And that is what's going to help us drive towards finding better treatments, better therapies, and a cure ultimately faster than anybody else in the market. How are we structured as an enterprise in Canada? We have a board of directors. So I mentioned at the beginning of this, we just had our Council of Chapters meeting. That elected the board of directors for the ensuing year. The board of directors provides oversight over management monthly through the executive committee. So in fact, all those committees you see reporting to the board actually meet on a monthly basis. Many of you in this room are participants on one or several of those committees. And for that, we appreciate your time. But that's the marker of good governance in this day and age, too. Those committee meetings aren't just there for sort of standard reporting. I mean, that is a function of what they do. But there are also forums monthly through the year where people get to share their ideas, develop and share best practices, and move our programs forward. And that's really helped with our program development. From a good governance standpoint, obviously the executive committee is to provide oversight for each of those committees, make sure I'm doing my job, everybody within JDRF Canada is doing our job, and our finance committee is there to make sure we're hitting our numbers or keeping pace with our numbers at least. At the chapter level, where I think all of us started with JDRF, and many of us still participate today, I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road. We are still very much a decentralized organization. The relationships within JDRF, for the most part, are owned at the chapter level. It's people, the local volunteer level, that make all our events happen. We couldn't do 70 walks across the country without volunteer participation at the chapter or site level across the country. It's just not possible. And we certainly couldn't do it without participation of our volunteers. We're just over 100 people in terms of a staff contingent across Canada. If you look at last Sunday, Big Walk, Telus Walk to Cure Diabetes Day, we were running over 17 walks in parallel on the day. Well, 100 staff couldn't possibly cover that. We can't deliver our programs without the participation of volunteers. And so that's why one of the sessions we did yesterday, led by John Lipp, which was so important, is volunteer engagement and volunteer training. We have to keep volunteers satisfied, engaged, and letting them understand how important, how effective their role is within the organization. So the staff-volunteer partnership is paramount to making this organization work. Revenue by region. So this just gives you a percentage breakdown. So that $24 million is the core operations, as we like to call them: walk, ride, galas, special events, other events. And so the percentage breakdown associated with that without CCTN. So you remember the big CCTN number, the consolidated number was over $30 million, but the $24 million of core revenue breaks down across, I think everybody can probably see that color code. I don't have to march through the numbers for you. And then I'm going to start talking about the events. But first off, does anybody in the room know what the rule of 72 is? Anybody? Yeah? Financial planner, financial planner, financial planner. I didn't see the investment banker put his hand up, though. I'm a little worried about that. So the rule of 72, it's a great trick. It's not a trick, I mean, it's basic math. But it's a mechanism by which, by using an observed interest rate or an actual payment, you can tell how long it's going to take you to double your money. So I'll give you a tangible example. Let's say I'm going out for lunch with Aubrey, and he pulls his usual trick and says, "Oh, Andrew, sorry, I forgot my wallet again. Can I borrow $10 to pay for my lunch? Of course, Aubrey, I'd be delighted to lend you $10, but I'm going to have to charge you interest. I mean, 5 lunches in a row, you've forgotten your wallet. This is getting a little indecent. So I like to compound my interest daily. I think it's fair. Aubrey has the ability to pay. It's not unreasonable. And so I would go with, let's say, a 10% interest rate. Keep the math nice and simple. So $10 at a 10% interest rate, how long would it take me to double my money if Aubrey hasn't paid me back? 7.2 days. Thank you. So in 7.2 days, a week later when we go for lunch again, Aubrey now owes me $20. It's a great system. So as we go through these, I'm going to talk about compound annual growth rates on our programs. And when you're looking at the compound annual growth rates, that'll tell you how long it's going to take us to double the size of the programs. And if you look at what JDRF's achieved over the last 10 years, 9 years, 10 years, as you reach back to 2003, you'll see that we more than doubled the size of the number of our programs. And what we should be thinking about is how long is it going to take us at those compound annual growth rates, investing in each of these individual programs, because they do have different CAGRs across the programs, to double the size of the program. Because those are great aspirational goals for us going forward. So I'm not going to try and calculate those numbers in my head as I go, but total revenue excluding CCTN. So this is core operations. You can see over the period 2003 to 2012, we've achieved 69% growth in top-line revenue with a 49% expense growth rate. That's great. You want to see that delta. Gross revenues should always be growing faster than your expenses, if at all possible. Otherwise, you're just treading water. So total revenue over the last 10 years, our compound annual growth rate's been about 6%. So rule of 72, that would say it's going to take us 12 years to double the size of our business again. At JDRF Canada, we're always looking for what are those programs or what are those events where we can invest directly to get the greatest return on our money, or greatest return on investment today. And you'll see what some of the higher investment rate return programs are as we go forward. If we include CCTN, you'll see a dramatic spike in revenue, but it takes time for that to affect your long-term compound annual growth rate. So the great way to do it is cheat and just calculate the compound annual growth rate for the last 3 years to show you the impact it's had. But really, on a 10-year horizon, compound annual growth rate including CCTN takes our 6% without CCTN up to about 8%. So while CCTN's had a huge impact to the contribution that we're making to research in the immediate future, we do need steady growth in our programs over time to really move that needle. Revenue sources. Where does all our revenue come from? Again, broken down. We've done it with CCTN or without CCTN, with CCTN for you. You can see the 24 million versus the 30 million. Ride and walk. This certainly wasn't true even 5 years ago. Ride and walk are equal contributors within the revenue base of JDRF Canada now. The ride has seen phenomenal growth. So if you want your BCG matrix, which has your stars, your dogs, your cash cows, everything else, walk remains a cash cow for us. It's a steady earner. It grows at a rate of 4 to 6% in its growth years. We can't get much more of that. It has been flat in some years, but that is a core program for us and really important. When you look at JDRFI in the States, that is their core program. That represents about 70% of their revenue is the Walk to Cure Diabetes and JDRFI's numbers. We've got a little more balance in our portfolio here with the ride, and the growth in the ride has really helped that. Major gifts, we have a slightly larger contribution from our major gifts program than the USC's right now as well. And then other programs, and I'll talk about other in just a sec for you. So net available versus our commitment to research. Commitment to research is a net-based number that we talk about with JDRFI every year. So our base commitment that we want to make sure we're netting and is available to provide in any given year is $8 million, excluding CCTN. So that's why you see that $8 million number steady there. What you can see is the impact that CCTN's had in terms of total contribution. And so that's where you get the really exciting hockey stick graph. What does that mean right now? We've had 325% growth since 2003, with a compound annual growth rate of 15.51%. So quick math, with that kind of return on investment, how long would it take us to double the size of the business? I didn't actually do the math. Somebody has to figure it out. Three years. That's the kind of impact and contribution that CCTN is making to this as a business. And we are a business. I mean, there are a lot of dedicated people working very, very hard, using sophisticated techniques, programs, and strategies to try and deliver the maximum net available research that we can. And that's what we've managed to achieve, and really in the last 3 years with the addition of CCTN. Bottom line, so as it's reported in our PwC audited accounts, what you have in your annual report, and is Jen in the room? Is Jen? I don't think Jen is in there. We handed out the annual report cards. So hopefully all of you have seen something new that we've done this year. So traditionally we've printed a bunch of annual reports, and my parsimonious nature has trouble with the cost of printing annual reports, so we've gone online. Luckily it's in vogue these days, so our annual report is available online. All of you can look it up. It's just like reading a real annual report. When you click the page, it goes swoosh as you flip the page, and that was very important to Jen, so we got that included. It also saved us quite a bit of money in printing costs. So please go and look at the annual report online. You'll see how it connects to all these numbers. But the bottom line, so the money's contributed to research-related education and advocacy, you will see is $24.398 million this year. Didn't quite manage to beat last year's record. I really want to go out on that last high, but we were close enough. Statistical significance, we're within the same range, so it's comparable. Research spending and the role of international and JDRF globally. So as I mentioned, raise money in 7 different countries around the world, fund projects in 18 countries. There are nearly 1,000 active research projects going on globally right now in JDRF International's research portfolio. This is FY11. These are FY11 numbers. FY11, JDRFI runs on a June 30th to July 1st year end rather than calendar year end like we do. So FY11 is actually a year and a half ago in their time. We don't have their new numbers yet. But you can see the U.S., or where we're funding research, is about 59% in the U.S. and 41% internationally. So while a preponderance of money is actually raised in North America between JDRF US and JDRF Canada, there's a pretty good distribution globally around the funding. And that's just testament, once again, to trying to find the best research as it exists anywhere in the world today. Research spending in various affiliate countries. You can see the role Canada plays there relative to the U.S. So the U.S. is about 58%, 59% of the spending. Canada is about 24% of the global research spending. Australia and the UK with 4.2 and 5.2% bring up the next tier. And then rest of the world is an aggregate of all those other countries where we're participating. Research commitments in Canada. So at present, we have contracts or we're funding programs that total about $60.6 million of research. Once again, here's the reason, here's the rationale, here's the drive to keep raising funds as we go forward for JDRF. Research projects aren't moments in time. They take months and most often years of committed funding to develop. And I can see Paul sitting here in the room. He's a great example, and I'm going to keep using it as an example because it was a great talk yesterday. Thanks, Paul. Of how consistent but sustainable research funding is leading to great progress. Paul's taken something that was, a drug that had fallen into, was never used for type 1 diabetes, had the mechanism to go back, look for a new way of evaluating drugs, and can we apply that to diabetes in some way, and is now taking that towards commercialization. As I talk a little more in a minute about CCTN, I'm going to talk about that commercialization process and how important that is to getting new drugs, therapies, devices, and treatments to the market and into the hands of patients. The walk to cure diabetes. Is there anybody in this room who has not participated in the walk? No brave souls who would admit that? Good, because I was going to vilify you if you hadn't. Remember that average pledge number that I was talking about at the beginning on the generosity index? How much was the average pledge for a tax filing Canadian? $260. How much was the average pledge in our 2012 walk? $512. So that is just dedicated to one program here at JDRF. It's not quite double, but it is significantly more that we're achieving per participant in their average pledge than any Canadians donating in their total claims on their tax return in a year. That's us punching above our weight. That is great news, and that's the type of good work we need to continue pursuing. I can talk about the impact of our corporate partners as well on this slide. Many of you in this room will remember the Shoppers Walk for the Cure. Again, that was one of the early days of us being able to deliver truly national programs, and that was a great partnership there. Then we had Super Pages, Yellow Pages step in as the National Walk sponsor. Boston Pizza has been a very consistent sponsor of the enterprise and the organization over the years. In fact, over the last 5 years, Boston Pizza has contributed in excess of $1 million to JDRF Canada. Really, really impressive work. And, the Trelivings are a great group, great family. They do it primarily through a golf tournament for their foundation that they host every year in Vancouver. They're at their end of their funding profile. We're in active discussions with them right now about renewal of that, and things are looking very encouraging on that front. Similarly, you can see our friends from Telus. That also has had a tremendous impact on our walk. People look at the first year where you can see the Telus logo, the $8.458 million, and they'll say, okay, where's that spike? Why have they fallen off? That's the byproduct of a matching program Telus used to have. In the first year they participated with us, they matched dollar for dollar every dollar that an employee associated with Telus raised in the walk, plus a match for any contribution we were making. Telus in their initial year thought that match was going to be in the order of $100,000 or $110,000. In true JDRF fashion, we got sort of excited and motivated, and that match wound up costing them $450,000. Their matching program changed the next year, not because of JDRF. There was an economic downturn, and so they revised it. And so they've dialed back. There is still a matching program at Telus, but we can't actually hit the $450,000 a year in match, although I'm working on a strategy to try and get us there. So Telus has been a super partner. We're in the third year of a 3-year agreement with them, and we are also actively negotiating a new agreement with Telus, and hopefully we'll be able to come back with you later in the year with some good news around that. We're also talking to Telus about engaging them and getting some further participation in the Canadian Clinical Trials Network and helping us expand that out across the country. National pledge revenue online and offline. Reason we throw this slide up, it's a great metric to look at. It is much more efficient for us to get people to donate to us online than it is to fill out a pledge form. It's just easier from a processing capacity. I can see Don sitting there nodding his head going, yeah, IMS charges us money for sorting through all those pledge forms. The other reason to get people to pledge you online or support you online is you get a higher average pledge per individual when somebody pledges you online than they do when they give you $20 at the office. So the natural inclination is, I'm raising money for my walk. Can you give me a contribution? You may not have a direct connection to diabetes, but you want to help out your friend at the office. Go in their wallet. Typically, they'll grab a 20 and give it to you. The average pledge when you get somebody to go online to make the pledge and use their credit card is somewhere around $50. So don't let people pull out their wallet at the office. Get them to go online and use their credit card. Again, Telus Contribution, I talked a little bit about this, but you can actually see Telus likes critters, as you all know, plants, leaves. That footprint leaf thing at the top is the Telus Walk to Cure Diabetes logo. And so we put this slide together 2 years ago when I was going out to have a meeting with Josh Blair, one of the senior guys in Telus, to talk about, just update them. And we created, this is the beauty of having a great graphics department inside, they created these plant graphs. I've never seen a plant graph before. I'm not sure I can explain it all that well either, but all the numbers are written at the top for you to read, so you can actually see what the contribution is. But Telus loved it. It's like, oh, I love that. What are those? They're plants. Oh, we love plants. That's fantastic. On the ride, I mentioned before, the ride has been a disproportionate contributor in terms of growth to us as an enterprise over the last little while. So once again, our actual average pledge participant on the ride is about $320. So again, well above that $260, not quite as high as our walk participants. But the ride's done a few things for us as an organization. It's opened up a very different market to us. So when you look at the profile of the participants that come to our walk, people at the walk tend to have a very direct connection to type 1 diabetes. It's in themselves, it's an immediate family member, a grandchild, whatever it may be, and they tend to have a reasonably good understanding of what type 1 diabetes is. In our ride, we've tapped into a whole new market. There, 80% of the people participating have a knowledge of diabetes, but they don't have a direct connection. It's distant at best, and it's usually a type 2 connection. The ride is an event people are coming and participating for the fun of the event, for the team building experience, for the day. Well, who's kidding who? You get 2 hours out of the office in the middle of a work day. Like, how good's that? but people show up, and we've tapped into an entirely new market, and that's been a real growth market for us. That's significant in one, that it spreads the word, creates better understanding, and two, it's letting us tap into a capital pool, a resource pool that we just never had access to before. And so when we look at what our average pledge has been over the last few years, in 2010, the average pledge for the ride was $366. 2011, it was $318. Last year in 2012, it was $320. But you can look at the revenue growth that we've seen in the ride over the last few years. And I mean, it's just been amazing, and it's continuing on that trend. Again, different characteristics of the donor. So remember on the walk, you had that 50-50 split or the 54-46 split last year. Ride participants, much more inclined to go to their computers, participate online, and donate online. So again, very helpful, and it's a great trend to be moving people more online. We saw an increase again in online participation, online donations within the ride, which is exactly what we're trying to achieve. Sectors and competitors. I think everybody here is fairly familiar with the ride program, how it works. Many of you know through its history, we've been heavily weighted towards the financial sector. The big banks have made a disproportionate contribution in terms of participation and donor dollars through time. Again, the finance sector is still very, very important to us. And last year, I'll use Toronto walk numbers because that's where I've got best data yet. We're still analyzing some of the other information. Finance sector in the Toronto walk last year grew at 9%. So again, good growth, but not the hyper growth we were seeing in previous years from it. By contrast, the real estate sector grew at 46% in the Toronto market last year, and the insurance sector grew at 18%. So those sector challenges are really relatively new in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're a great way of engaging sort of other elements of the economy, other enterprises. And if you don't have a big financial presence within your community, I guarantee you've got lawyers, and I guarantee you've got insurance people, be it an insurance company, insurance brokers, whatever. And so having those sector challenges and the competition associated with the ride is what people seem to really enjoy about it, pitting, State Farm against cooperators locally in your market, or, one legal firm against another in your market. It's a great way to encourage competition, spirit. You can give a spirit cup for the sector and just get more people involved in the event. Okay, on Galas. So our Gala program, I know it looks like a rocky road. I think most of you know that Toronto runs their Gala every other year, and so that's why you see the grand vicissitudes and the sort of Swiss Alps picture that you've got there. But what is important is you can see consistent and sustainable growth in our Galas program over the last number of years. In fact, compound annual growth rate for Galas has been about 13.28%. So more than double the rate that our that our walk's been growing at, and sort of in parallel with our ride growth rate. Major gifts. So Major Gifts still remains the highest returning program to us. It's got the lowest cost per gift associated with everything we do. So if you were looking at this as an investment portfolio and saying, okay, my cost of capital is X, doesn't matter what it is, where am I best to invest all my dollars? Major Gifts would be the easy and logical conclusion. The challenge is, without all the other programs, we can't engage and maintain our team to pursue Major Gifts. So the cost of Major Gifts to the enterprise, JDRF Canada, is less than 10% on a gift on the whole. And that is really where we want to drive as much future growth as possible because it's the most efficient use of donor funds, if at all possible. So compound annual growth rate on that one over the last, since 2002, so over the last 10 years, is again 13.42%. So Galas and Major Gifts have really been delivering on that growth rate, and we can really double the size of those programs at that rate in less than 4 years. Other historical revenues, so you can see we're down about 18% on prior year on other. Other is a portfolio that we have some control over, but not entirely control over as the staff team or the management team. It includes things like United Way contributions, third-party events, direct mail, casinos, raffles, miscellaneous. Why are we down 18% on last year? In Alberta, where we run a lot of casinos, bingos, raffles, we didn't run as many as we did last year. United Way contribution to JDRF was down by a little bit over last year in terms of absolute dollars contributed. Direct mail is a diminishing program. We actually don't run an active direct mail program in the sense we aren't acquiring new names, new lists, new mailings. We are mailing every year to prior donors from our direct mail list. But again, when you look at deployment or investment of our capital, where we're trying to put it into programs, we're much better to invest dollars into walks, rides, major gifts, and other areas because the return on direct mail is actually relatively low. Social media. So I don't have a Facebook account. I know I should. I don't. I don't have a Twitter account, but I do have lots of people at the office who tell me about these things. And if I want to stalk one of you on Facebook, I go to Jen's office and I say, can we look up this person? And she finds me all the information I need. But Facebook has been, since we launched the programs, really done very well for us. You can see we're up to 1,862 Facebook likes. The tipping point around a Facebook program or a like program for an enterprise is meant to be somewhere around 2,000 likes. I know in the Facebook world you don't call it a tipping point, but that's the vernacular I understand, so we'll use it for today. Regions also maintain all their own local pages, and this is a great way of communicating local events, what's going on, local interest, giving a real local flavor to that community. You can see we've got regional likes in the order of about 4,720. JDRF Quebec runs a bilingual Facebook page with about 275 likes right now, and then CCTN has its own Facebook page as well. Twitter, again, we've got 1,307 followers on Twitter right now. If any of you are keen tweeters, you would have seen at the award ceremony last night, all the pictures we were taking of the awards that were given were actually posted in association with their corporate name. Can't remember what the hashtag was, but every company, what's that? JDRF AGM. That one. So hashtag JDRF AGM. In fact, Sarah may even be tweeting about this right now. Andrew's prattling on again. It's getting boring. You know, all the stuff that she knows I don't have a Twitter account, so how am I going to find out about it? But Twitter has been a great mechanism for us spreading the word and creating a real sort of sense of live activity as events are going on. So I'm sure there were people last night that were actually on Twitter watching the awards go up. Those will be tied to people's corporate pages. When we're talking to corporate sponsors and corporate development, one of the things we talk about is the Twitter and Facebook presence that they achieve in partnering with JDRF, and it's something of great interest to them these days. I love this slide. Here's 5 minutes of your life you're not going to get back. So JDRF plays an incredibly central role, and it's been a hugely expanded role over time. There are not only the constituents, our donors, who are concerned about their loved ones living with type 1 diabetes and how we're going to develop a treatment or a cure to help them, but it's our sphere of influence that we're talking about and our expanded role that's changed so much really in the last 10 years. So where do I want to begin with that? Through our history. JDRF Canada is about 38 years old now. JDRFI in the States was founded in 1970. It's just over 40 years old. And our mission for a number of years was to fund research to find a cure. And that meant funding basic research. And there's an incredible amount of basic research that's been done through that period of time. In fact, that basic research has cured diabetes. It's cured diabetes in mice in over 150 different ways. We've cured diabetes in rats in more than 75 different ways. Fabulous news if you're a rodent. None of those cures have yet to be translated into humans. And there's a host of reasons for that. Diabetes is a complicated disease, but getting a drug, a treatment, a device, a therapy to market is also an incredibly complicated process. And there are a lot of constituents that have a role in that. JDRF is always looking for how can we be most effective with donor dollars, how can we be most effective with our volunteer time, and how can we be most effective in delivering those treatments, those therapies to our constituency. That's the ultimate goal. And so just funding basic research wasn't enough. You know, we're curing mice, we're curing rats, but we're not getting those therapies to people. So what do we have to do to influence others? So an example of that is in the early 2000s, JDRF globally looked at what we were doing, and we said, you know, we're funding this basic research, but it's not getting out of the clinic. It's getting stuck, it's getting stranded somewhere. And Paul yesterday talked about the funding valley of death. Again, not a great term for a health charity to use and promote, but it's a reality in that paradigm that represents the commercialization of drugs, devices, pills, treatments, whatever you like. And the valley of death stands between the basic researcher, the lab, the university, so picture guys in white coats with test tubes and microscopes doing all the good work they do there with their little friendly mice. But you need to get that out to people. Getting that out to people requires clinical trials. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 are the basic stages of clinical trials. And there's an escalating expense associated with each phase in those clinical trials. So a phase 1 trial is a safety trial, a first-in-man trial. And it usually involves 8, 10, maybe up to 20 patients. Costs $1 million to $5 million. And I'm going to use some broad generalities in describing this right now. That $1 to $5 million is actually quite difficult money to raise. Basic research money, I'm pretending it's easy to find basic research money, but there are a number of funding sources for basic research funds right now. CHR is a participant in this country. Ourselves, JDRF, obviously a significant player in funding basic research and diabetes research. Institutions themselves, universities, will fund basic researchers and help them work on that. Individual donors may find a researcher where they like a basic research idea. CDA, they're another basic research funder within Canada. So there's a portfolio of players there. But as you start to move into trials, there are many fewer participants that are prepared to engage in that space. In fact, it's not really until late phase 2 or early phase 3 where you can get big pharma involved, and they will fund in a significant way. So as a general rule of thumb, commercialization of a new molecule, a new device, a new treatment, let's say, for any disease, but we're obviously specific to diabetes, costs somewhere between $500 million and $1.25 billion from basic discovery to get it to market, and takes somewhere between 12 and 15 years if everything goes perfectly. That assumes you don't hit a speed bump along the way. You don't have a failure in a trial. You don't have to go back and reinvent it. Well, you've seen our numbers as JDRF. In aggregate, over the 40-year history of JDRF globally, we've funded somewhere in the region of $1.7 billion US in research. So we've funded nearly enough in theory to get 2 drugs or devices to market, if we exclusively funded those 2 drugs or devices. So we can't actually take a basic molecule as JDRF and get it all the way to market for you. What we can do is intervene at different stages along the way and help encourage others, work as that broker, that leverage point, that funder in many ways. And funding is a key component of this. Don't underestimate how important the funding at key stages along the way is for these efforts. And so that's where we formed in 2002 our international IDDP, so International Drug Discovery Partnerships Program. And that's where JDRF actively started to partner with small biotechs or small companies. Because there's no drug, device, or therapy that gets to market, at least in Western society, without going through a company at some point. You need that commercialization element to get these great ideas to market. And our IDDP program was very novel at the time. Other not-for-profit enterprises weren't doing it. There was a question, should you be co-investing with companies? What's the return? How do you evaluate that? A lot of work went into developing that program. And so we went, and it's not a huge part of the portfolio of investment we use, but they're very strategic and targeted investments to help encourage those small biotechs to get into phase 1, and if necessary, help them get into those phase 2 trials. So phase 1 trial, remember, costs about $1 million to $5 million. Phase 2 trial, order of magnitude, you're looking at $10 to $25 million usually. They can be bigger, and call it 50 to 100 participants in the trial. So the first trial, phase 1, is to establish safety, and safety alone. Does this, picture is a pill. That's always the easiest way to do it. So a pill or an ointment, a treatment. Does this pill or treatment do any additional harm to the individual? It's not does it help them, does it do any additional harm to the individual? And that's what's established in a phase 1 trial, safety trial. Phase 2 trial is an efficacy trial. And so that's where you start to look, is there therapeutic benefit to this? Is there a statistically significant difference in using this treatment against standard care? And that's what's usually tested in phase 2. If you can get through phase 2, that's where big pharma of the world is now interested. This thing has a real shot on goal. Because, and Paul, you're probably better to speak to this than I am, but it's from the discovery of a new molecule or basic compound to commercialization, the ratio of drugs that make it is less than 1,000 to 1. So on that scale, on that basis, you need a lot of shots on goal to get any of these to market, and you need a lot of money to get them there. And so JDRF, by interceding or intervening in the phase 1, phase 2 trial space with our partnerships program and with CCTN, that's really what we set CCTN up to do, is to intervene in that space, is moving some of these great ideas out of the lab or from bench to bedside, as the saying goes. So that's a funding role for us. At the same time, JDRF can play a key role as an influencer on the FDA and Health Canada. And we've been doing a lot more work in that enterprise as well. How do we work with these health regulatory agencies to speed the approval of beneficial therapies? And I think, again, Paul's example yesterday was a great one of how he's looking for avenues to work with the FDA and looking for avenues to work with Health Canada, and with CCTN, we've certainly helped all of our trials there move faster through the market. Having a voice like JDRF standing there next to a corporate entity or a researcher adds a level of credibility, or a level of independent evaluation that gives extra confidence to those health regulators in looking at device or drug approval. We are the patient constituency that says, this is important to us, this matters. What can we do to move this more quickly towards market for our constituency? So I talked about academia, talked a bit about government-funded research and how the role of CHR is there to fund things. CHR tends, again, to fund at the very early stages, basic research. They don't really get into the trial space. There is a big new initiative inside CHR, Canadian Institutes of Health Research right now, to try and get into the space of funding trials. That's called the SPORE. Can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's patient-oriented research. One of the things they're modeling after, and we've had several discussions with them, is CCTN. They've actually come to us and saying, how did you guys do this? How did you get it delivered so quickly? The challenge for CHR right now is their annual budget is somewhere around $1 billion a year. That $1 billion is divided across 13 different institutes, which are funding health research in Canada, medical research in Canada. And it's trying to address every disease. It's the real shotgun approach. They want to be everything to everybody within CHR. So what you aren't getting is the kind of targeted investment that we're delivering at JDRF on type 1 diabetes, which is obviously the prime interest of the crowd in this room. Healthcare payers, you can see sitting at the top, healthcare payers and industry. So, as we talk and compare ourselves to the US and many of the things we do, we talk about how we have a national health system, a government-funded health system. We don't have HMOs in Canada like they do in the States and everything you hear about that. It's actually not true. We do have HMOs in Canada. They just happen to be government-funded. So OHIP, really by definition of what an HMO looks like, is an HMO. It has a drug formulary, a prescripted list of what they will fund and reimburse. To use the Ontario example, Alberta Health is in the same position. Every provincial health funding authority is really just a big government-run HMO. One of the challenges with running an HMO when you've got a prescripted formulary of the drugs or treatments or devices that you're allowed to provide is that defines what will be reimbursed. So a great example, and this is something that's come out of CCTN, was with a Medtronic device. So several of our trials were using Medtronic devices, but Medtronic has low glucose suspend device and CGMS technology, and a new device that they wanted to bring to market. We initially got, within the confines of a trial, an early approval to use that device in patients in this market. Through the course of that trial and working with Medtronic, they made their follow-on applications to make it widely available to the entire market in Canada. And now you guys have Health Canada approval for a whole new device that probably wouldn't have got this market for 2 or 3 years. So being active in these different spaces within Canada is help providing the body of evidence that lets regulators move to early approval on each of these things. Am I beyond the 5 minutes of your life you weren't going to get back? Okay. Research goals: cure, treat, and prevent. I think all of you know these are the different arenas that we play in. JDRF is trying to address the challenges of diabetes at all ages and stages of life right now for people. So if we can prevent diabetes from occurring in the first place, fantastic. That would be the ultimate goal. Never having type 1 diabetes occur in another individual would be brilliant. And there are a number of prevention therapies we're working on, all the way from vaccine technologies to stem cell regenerative therapies. There's a great portfolio of stuff being worked on there right now. But even if we did come up with the prevention tomorrow for type 1 diabetes, we still have a large constituency of people out there living with type 1 diabetes and its challenges and its potential complications. So from the treatment perspective, we're looking at how do we achieve optimal glycemic control within individuals to prevent the potential onset of complications. That's really what's at the core of our treatment strategy. And then ultimately, of course, the cure. If we can find the cure, which will probably be a portfolio of therapies, if you like, it may involve islet cell transplant, it may involve some drug therapies along the way, that will deliver on the ultimate promise of the cure. So cure research, how do we break it down? Immune therapies. We cannot stop type 1 diabetes without stopping the autoimmune attack within individuals. You look at something like the Edmonton Protocol. We can take donor pancreases or donor material and restore insulin independence within individuals living with type 1 diabetes. But the challenge with that is it is a transplant. You have to take anti-rejection autoimmune drugs to dull down the autoimmune response that's occurring, that's still there in an individual, and immediately starts attacking those transplanted cells, and that's what caused your type 1 diabetes in the first place. So turning off that autoimmune response is the first big challenge that we need to address. Beta cell therapies, well, right there is, replacement therapy. So Edmonton Protocol being a big one. Regeneration therapies, anti-CD3 trials that were being run are looking at regenerating beta cells using a pill-based solution, if you like, within individuals. We'll skip over highlight. Complications therapies. I won't dwell on complications therapies for very long. Paul, again, talking about his work last night, is a shining example of the complications portfolio or complications therapies we're working on. We're working on in a number of different arenas right now. Anything we can do to potentially delay the onset of complications and keep people healthier will make a cure that much more impactful and that much more effective when it comes along, and improve quality of life along the way. And then glucose control therapies. There are really two things we talk about here. So smart insulin is one of them, and I'm watching my time a bit, so I'll skip over smart insulin for now, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it afterwards. And then the artificial pancreas is the other. And rather than me telling you about the artificial pancreas, I'm going to let Tom Brobson tell you about it.
So, the artificial pancreas is an extraordinary thing if you really sort of step back and take a look at it. In 2005, this was a technology that nobody thought was really possible. There was significant debate in the expert community about, was it even possible? Could we take a pump and could we take a continuous glucose sensor and could we allow them to talk to each other wirelessly with some kind of a sophisticated communication computer software that would allow the sensor to tell the pump kind of what was going on and make decisions about helping to start automating this very hard, very burdensome reality of living and managing with type 1 diabetes. So what we were really trying to do when we looked at artificial pancreas technology was say, is it possible that we could put some brains into this system? Could we start to create some smarter pumps that could alleviate some of that constant drudgery, that daily burden of living with type 1 diabetes? And when we first started trying to do this, people said it couldn't be done. And JDRF said, well, we're going to do a targeted investment. And through the leadership of some amazing individuals, both on staff and on our volunteer side, we made some very targeted investments. And from that, quickly realized that not only was it possible, but it actually could be done and could work pretty well. So 2006, we got started. By 2007, we were testing these for the first time in human beings. We were able to jump out of the hospital into the real world, and last December, I got to live on the artificial pancreas for 3 days and 2 nights in the real world, where I was able to live and walk around and have a normal life for 3 days, 2 nights on an artificial pancreas. I got to go and have a cheeseburger and fries. I got to go have a hot fudge sundae one night. I really had a good time with this. I really had a lot of fun. When I was sitting there living on the artificial pancreas, I realized that I wasn't having to think about my diabetes. And for me, the cure means not having to think about my diabetes. So this isn't the cure, but it gave me a glimpse of what that world will be like when we don't have type 1 diabetes, and that's the most powerful takeaway from this entire experience. Many of you sitting in this room have been supporting JDRF for many, many years, decades. I really think it's important that we take a minute and sort of step back from this and really appreciate what it is that we've made happen here. JDRF has a plan, we've been executing it, but you've been coming to these events, you've been going to walks, you've been helping to support everything that we do, and it's driving towards an outcome. And now I'm able to sit here in front of you and show you an artificial pancreas that works on a cell phone. You made this happen. To me, it's vitally important that we take a minute and step back and say thank you. Because if you hadn't have done all of the work you've done in those years before, I would not be sitting here today with this. And just as we've done it with this, we're going to do it with any number of other things that JDRF is working on to bring us new therapies that will change the course of this disease in our lives and ultimately lead to a world without type 1 diabetes. JDRF is leading the way, and together we will create a world without type 1 diabetes. Thank you.
Prevention research, I touched on that briefly at the beginning. Again, vaccine therapies are a big thing we're looking at there. There are methods of other prevention that we're looking at. Dr. Jane Danska is working on a great project down at Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto right now, looking at the manipulation of gut microflora, so the bugs in your gut and what the composition of those is. We think that may be one of the key triggers that sets off the autoimmune response in the first place. Jane's really a geneticist, but fantastic work going on there, which I could spend half an hour telling you about that project alone, but I won't. That one's 10 minutes of your life you won't get back, so I'm going to skip that one. CCTN. I think everybody in the room here has at least a passing familiarity with JDRF Canadian Clinical Trial Network. This has changed the way we fund research here in Canada. We've moved that paradigm from really just the exclusive venue of funding basic research into dealing immediately with patients and getting treatments into their hands or therapies into their hands today that have an impact on them. And that serves in that big wheel diagram, the 5 minutes of your life diagram. This is really delivering on many of those elements within that diagram right now and has just been, of huge importance to what we've done here in Canada. And you've also seen its impact on our fundraising and our actual contribution to research dollars in Canada too. It's also generated lots of pictures from press conferences. So Trial Network, I won't dwell on it. The short story is when we entered into the agreement with the government, we undertook to deliver a minimum of 3 human clinical trials associated with the artificial pancreas project in some way, shape, or form. We delivered 9. So under promise, over deliver, we did that in spades with the government. We also delivered on 2 technology projects. All that funding, $34 million, had to be funded, pre-funded and in place by March 31st, 2012 last year. We successfully achieved that, and now we're pressing forward with other funding opportunities. You can see the spread in the mix of trials. We actually have 2 great researchers here to talk to you later this morning about some of the individual trials, so I certainly won't talk about their trials. I won't talk about any of the others. Our website certainly covers them very well, and if anybody wants to grab me afterwards, I'm delighted to talk about any trial at any time, probably for longer than you want to. Where are we? We're active in 24 institutions across Southern Ontario right now. That was the mandate associated with the initial government partnership. First funds had to be delivered and spent within Southern Ontario. Now, we are looking at expanding JDRF CCTN across Canada. That's always been our goal. And its foundation, that's what we put it in place to do. And that is the arena that we're now operating in. So I'll skip over some of the individual trials, unless you want me to go back, but tell you about one great event that happened happened this year. So the WB Family Foundation, the Beamish family, very generously set forward and provided $3 million over the next 3 years to help with the expansion of CCTN. So we've got an active research competition going on right now. We're actually in the review process associated with this. We had an initial 14 applications come in under this from right across the country to deliver trials in other parts of the world. And by the end of June, we should have our initial notifications out, or that's what we're working towards, to probably 2 successful research projects. We'll be launching trials somewhere else in Canada. It could be Southern Ontario, but based on what I've seen of the applications coming in, there's some real opportunity. It looks like other provinces in Canada are going to be participating as well. Similarly, this gift on its own has given us a great reason to engage other provincial governments. So this has helped spark conversations with Province of New Brunswick, Government of New Brunswick, Government in Alberta, and with the Government of BC, and actually a conversation that's ongoing with the Government of Saskatchewan right now to bring trials, to bring type 1 diabetes trials into those communities as well. And ultimately, that's one of our key goals here at JDRF Canada, is to bring CCTN to everybody out there. And with that, I think I'm done. Thanks, everyone.